Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for showing up. So if everybody can find their seat, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you all for coming for this EPC event on the subsea sector, cable sector in Europe. This is an event marking the launch of our new report on the sector, building on and trying to expand the work already done by the Commission in their action plan on cable security, trying to work on where we're going to go further in the subsea sector. This is an EPC event hosted by me, Varg Folkman, who's a policy analyst at the Europe's Political Economy Program. This has been a co-project done with Europe in the World and their DefSec team. It's been a great collaborating with them, and also our partner, the Vodafone Institute for Society and Communications, which have contributed a lot to both in terms of funding and also knowledge sharing in general, helped us realize this project. So a huge thank you all around, and we're very pleased to see the report finally published, and we're very happy to be able to host this event and convene this great panel to discuss everything going on in the subsea sector in general, with a focus on competitiveness, security, and resilience in general. And in the report, we survey the broad sort of cross-span of all of the issues facing the subsea sector in Europe and in the world in general. We take a deeper look at who builds and operates fiber optic cables specifically, what the issues are in securing it against sabotage and hybrid attacks. We look at unreliable actors involved in the European value chain here, in critical infrastructure, mainly China, which we also are looking at in loads of different other value chains in general. We also look at how cooperation between military actors, private companies, and governments work when it comes to hybrid action, and how we respond and repair broken cables and faults in general. And we're looking forward to continuing this work in general. But let's get on with the event. This will be an open and conversational discussion. We will start with a round of 5 minutes each for each of the panelists here, where they will sort of lay out what they view as the broad and main issues facing the sector in general. So to introduce the panel, we first have Elisabeth Braw, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and currently working on a book on the topic we're discussing today. We have Miguel González-Sancho as the head of Unit for Future Connectivity Systems at the DG Connect of the European Commission. We have Darren Ennis, who's the EU Affairs and Relations Director at Vodafone, our partner in this project. And last but not least, we have retired Lieutenant General Hans-Werner Wiermann, who was the head of NATO's Critical Undersea Infrastructure Coordination Cell. So to get started, I'll ask you first, Elisabeth, to open up and give us 5 minutes of your thoughts on the sector and its issues and what are the main problems facing it.
Thank you. Well, I was reminded of various misnomers when I read the news this morning, which is that AWS, their cloud is down, and that was a good reminder of the fact that the cloud is not the cloud, but it is the undersea. And whoever thought up that term should be contrite, because what seemed like a sort of a convenient marketing ploy years ago to say, things are in the cloud, actually has led people to believe that our data somehow sit in the cloud, when in fact they are transported through subsea cables. And that is particularly useful to know now that we have discovered, or we have learned, not just discovered, we have learned, we have experienced that undersea cables can sustain mysterious damage that can't easily be attributed. And I think it's useful to think of undersea cables. It's obviously data cables that are the focus of this discussion, but also power cables are worth thinking about and paying attention to. They are the twin of globalization, right? I mean, we had globalization explode during the 90s and onwards until now. Exploded, as in growing, not being blown up, growing until now, and that would not have happened to the same extent as it did without undersea cables. Undersea cables were the underpinning, as it were, of the globalized economy, or are the underpinning of the globalized economy. Conversely, the globalized economy and a peaceful world were the underpinning for the immense growth of undersea infrastructure, because it was only the assumption that we all wanted to get along, meaning all countries wanted to get along, that allowed or convinced companies that investing significant, enormous amounts in undersea infrastructure was worth the investment. If they had, at the time when, starting in the early 90s when the internet took off, if companies at that point had said, well, it is just too dangerous, who knows who might want to harm our cables, we are not willing to make that investment. Who knows how the internet would have developed, and as a result, how the globalized economy would have developed. So these are Siamese twins, right? And now globalization is struggling for geopolitical reasons. And then, lo and behold, undersea cables are struggling for much the same reason. And it's not as if there are attacks, suspicious attacks on a daily basis. But the fact that we have had a string of mysterious events is enough to call into question the arrangement on which this entire infrastructure has been laid, meaning the agreement among the world's nations and operators that it's safe enough to have infrastructure at the bottom of or on the seabed, because nobody would want to harm it, because they too depend on it, and that is changing. And I'm so pleased that General Wiermann is here, who was NATO's first point person to try to think about what NATO could do, even though looking after undersea cables is really not NATO's responsibility. But nobody else is responsible for the protection of undersea cables either, and that is the dilemma that we face now. And I think I'm at 5 minutes because you're looking very eagerly for me to wrap up, so I will wrap up with that. Who is responsible for the protection of undersea cables? We can say it's the operators, but if you extend that a little bit, what exactly would operators do other than monitoring their cables? It's not as if they somehow can act as some sort of militia taking action if something were to happen. So with that, I guess I will hand over to whoever is your next victim.
We can move on to Miguel. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks, first of all, for the invitation and for having organized this very timely discussion, I should say. So I work at the European Commission, in particular on the security of submarine cables. And I must say that from the perspective of the Commission, of the EU more generally, the awareness about the criticality of submarine cables has increased quite significantly over the last months. Around a series of incidents that were just mentioned, with always this uncertainty of, not knowing whether they were provoked, who's behind. So that's part of let's say, of the problem, which is this difficulty of, attributing. But anyway, that has has just been said. Everybody has realized that actually the submarine cables are absolutely critical to our information society these days, that over 95-96% of intercontinental data traffic, I'm talking about data cables, power cables, there are some, let's say, some issues that are common, but there's also some differences. But I understand that the focus of today's meeting is on data cables. So criticality of this infrastructure. Actually, the explosion that we see in data flows is mirrored and sustained by an explosion in the deployment of infrastructure on submarine cables. So those go hand in hand. So the Commission, for that matter, started to look into this not so long ago. There was, first of all, a recommendation from the Commission on the security and resilience of submarine cables last year. And this year, there was, as it was mentioned in the introduction, an action plan on the security of submarine cables. Now, multifaceted issue, fascinating. The action plan has several aspects, several pillars: prevention, detection, reply and repair, deterrence. So quite a few issues to look at. But for the setting, for the opening, I would say that there's several aspects here that are worth looking at. First of all, there's the issue of the security, plane security. So disruption of cables being cut, and it's a problem where actually from the Commission we've been working with a group of member state national authorities over the last months, and hopefully the results will be published very soon to map the cartography of submarine cables and to develop a risk assessment. So what are the main threats? And actually it comes in many categories. There's intentional damage that can be either physical or cyber. There is unintentional, man-made, or natural. Lots of problems which are not intentional actually from ships, fishing vessels, what have you. Then there's quite a few, there's some dependencies to look at in terms of the value chain, in terms of particular geographical constraints, problems, legal issues. So it's quite fascinating. I would say just to and also referring to the report where many things are mentioned. One big category of problems that grab the news is these potential attacks, hybrid attacks. You never know what, it's difficult to find out whether they are provoked or not. That would be one category. It's another one, I would say, which is less in the news, but still is part of the whole debate about, about sovereignty. So economic security. And it's not just the usual, high-risk vendors coming from China. No, it's also the fact that the hyperscalers are also in this area, basically most of the investment these days is coming from there. So these are private cables through which, the information is flowing, and basically they are in the hands of a few players with big pockets. That's something which is, to be kind of reflected upon from the side of Europe. So I would say at least these two categories of issues, just attacks, and in the context where we are, geopolitical tensions, Russian Southern Fleet and all of that thing. Indeed, there's a realization that cutting the right cables, can lead to major problems, and there's this impression that we might be tested at the moment to see what is the type of reaction, the speed. And then there's the other more long-term issue about, sovereignty and Europeans, digital strategic autonomy. So with that, I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Moving on to you, Darren.
Yes, thank you, and very grateful to be here. So first of all, thanks to the EPC for having us here, and also for also their cooperation with our colleagues at the Vodafone Institute on a great report, a very timely report, I think. It's interesting to pick up on, I suppose what I'm going to say will hopefully encapsulate what the two previous speakers spoke about, and is a good segue to the next speaker, because if we sum up at the end of the day, we can talk about the cloud, we can talk about all this virtualization of networks, and we all get very excited, and AI and all of this, but at the end of the day, 98% of all international internet traffic travels on bog standard cable, but cable which is strategically important, not just for Europe, but globally. And that's the starting point. We have financial transactions of up to $10 trillion dollars or euros, I should say, every day across the cables. And Vodafone ourselves, we have over 100 cables. And this morning, for example, we just announced that we are, with the support of the EIB, we're going to be laying a new cable into Ukraine from the Black Sea. And that is, as you can imagine, requires a lot of investment. And we are seeing a huge amount of, as a result of the geopolitical tensions, we're seeing, you know, as you said, a huge rise in hybrid threats, not just in the Baltic and the Red Sea, but also off the likes of Somalia and elsewhere, which actually affect connectivity here in Europe. There are three trends that we see, and this kind of encapsulates what the previous speaker said. Number one, aging infrastructure and limited repair capacity. We don't have enough repair ships that are European. So that then links to the second, which is around sovereignty. We, of course, you know, acknowledge and welcome the fact that our hyperscaler colleagues, some of which are in the room, are investing, and you know, there is a need for that investment, but there's also a need for European investment. So we welcome the action plan, but we need to now accelerate the action plan, and we need to come up also with European solutions. And unfortunately, and I know this is not about today's debate, but there is a linkage back to the upcoming Digital Networks Act and our push also for merger reform, because it's all about scale. I'm looking at my colleague from Telefonica, for example. European telecom operators need to be able to scale to be able to deliver these the level of security and resilience with regards to submarine cables. I won't get into the debate on the DNA or merger today, but I just wanted to make that important a point that from a Commission perspective, and I know DG Connect knows this very well, we need this holistic approach across the board when it comes to regulation. And that then leads me to my final point. We have a fragmented regulatory environment. We need a more harmonized approach. And I want to talk about some solutions, just very simple. We want to see more public-private partnership. We want to see more EU and NATO, more EU and UK, because submarine cables don't stop at the end of the 27 member states. We need more investment for increased redundancy and resilience. That, as I said, is public-private partnership, also working where we can with hyperscalers, for example, within when we look at digital partnerships, for example, where we do have like-minded countries, whether that is Korea or Japan or indeed our US partners, that we find that balance of sovereignty. You know, I think my final point is that, you know, like I said, I think submarine cables to Elisabeth was probably saying that it was kind of taken for granted. It can no longer be taken for granted, and it can no longer be taken for granted that us as a private sector and as telecom operators, that we have to take the full responsibility and accountability to keep them safe, secure, and sovereign.
Perfect. Thank you. Hans-Werner.
Well, I think much to the three colleagues that have spoken, so we know how important the cables are. Don't have to talk about that. I know about the need to diversify and the global aspects of digital infrastructure in general. Let me focus on what I've done in NATO very briefly about the threat, about the hybrid threat, the analysis, and what we can do about it. I became the head of the coordination cell for critical undersea infrastructure after I tried to retire unsuccessfully from my military post and served as a civilian in NATO. The challenge I got from the Secretary General was establish dialogue in the triangle between the government, the private sector actor, and the military, because all have stakes in critical undersea infrastructure. When we developed our concept, and I traveled in many capitals of NATO, I met very often with 6-7 representatives from different ministries, different stakeholders on the private sector side, and many said, glad you come, because for us in our capital, it's the first opportunity that we can actually bring together all the stakeholders in critical undersea infrastructure. So that underlines the point how complex this issue is. The threat. Russia has not stopped to invest after the Cold War in two strategic areas. One is nuclear deterrence, and you have seen maybe Putin's slideshow on nuclear weapons, and the other sector is undersea infrastructure and undersea technology, submarines, sub-submarines. Of course, it is also linked to the importance of the strategic nuclear assets Russia has undersea, but it has also a long tradition of listening into our cables and, of course, destroying our cables. It's part of a hybrid strategy. Hybrid strategy means you don't want to start a hot war. You try to do things which are asymmetric. You want to do a lot of harm, and you want to have a chance to get away with it. That's the core of this kind of hybrid strategy. So do harm and get away with it, and blur the situation. So the perfect counter strategy is make sure the perpetrator does not get away with it. That's the headline of NATO's strategy. It is identify suspicious behavior in the vicinity of critical undersea infrastructure in real time. Or in a short version, deny deniability. That's what we can do on the military side. We can identify the perpetrator in close cooperation with the private sector actor and the governments, because they are the masters of the intelligence services. But then the second question comes up, do we want to attribute what we have seen to a particular perpetrator? That's a deep and very much political decision, which in NATO's context would be taken in the North Atlantic Council. Our challenge is to be very clear, convince 32 member states that's what we have seen, that's the perpetrator. Whether they want to call them out, attribute, that's a political thing. What is it what we have done? We have set up a maritime center in Northwood, close to London, where we try to use modern information systems, sensors, to identify what's going on our critical undersea infrastructure. Therefore, we have to know where is our critical undersea infrastructure, which sometimes is not so easy because some governments think that some of their cables are so secret they don't better talk about it. And there is the other tendency, which if you call, for example, or talk to the representatives of the European Subsea Cable Organization, they say, yeah, you have a few cable cuts that are done by Russia, but we have 200 cable cuts worldwide, which threaten our business model. So what we want is, we want to make the coordinates of our cables transparent as possible. So whenever we change something because of repair or whatever happens, we want to have this on the internet so that no captain drops his anchor in the wrong place, or no fishing boat tries to fish with gear in the wrong place. So there's a natural tension here, which we have to discuss. So in Northwood, we try to merge and fuse information using artificial intelligence by looking through so many data that are available nowadays. And the most promising development, I think, is you can use fiber optic cables as sensors. You can simply plug onto the cable a technical instrument which also uses sensors and artificial intelligence, and you can detect things moving close to a fiber optic cable down to, well, maybe 10 kilos, 20 kilos. The problem today is we not necessarily know what's going on the cable, but that's only a question of time until through experiments you can find out what it is. If you can do that, we can actually observe our cables much better. Finally, there's no guarantee, and you can't defend every inch of cable. It's impossible. The only answer to hybrid threats in this kind of threat is resilience. And resilience comes at a price. So there's a tension between the private operator who wants to not spend too much money on infrastructure, but make more money on services provided to others, while resilience may require a second cable, which is extremely expensive. So how far will regulations go to actually enforce this resilience, or how much self-interest it is in the private sector actor to make sure that the business model is resilient enough to provide the services? So interesting question out there. Final remark, legal situation. On the high seas or on the oceans, you have basically three basic areas. One is the territorial waters, where the state has the same authorities as on land. So police can control, you can be indicted, you can be put into jail, easy. 12 nautical miles normally. Few exceptions. Then you have the exclusive economic zone, reaching out 200 nautical miles, where you have certain rights and obligations as a literal state when it comes to natural resources, but you don't have executive authorities, so you can't stop a ship. And beyond that, you have the high seas, where the key principle is the freedom of the high seas, so you can do what you want. This raises the question, if you do what you want, and you are entitled to do so, and you put a cable in the water, does somebody else have the right to destroy it? Probably not. But the question there is linked to the flag state, which is a new discussion, which has become new prominence, I think, just today, when the High Representative said we have to talk to the flag states of the shadow fleet, for example, to make sure we can board the ships, which is a very important step, with consensus of the flag state. So the legal issues are complicated. We started the work strand in NATO to actually get to a common interpretation of the law, not to write a new law, but to interpret the laws in the very same way, which is an ongoing process, probably will never be finished, but it's very important. Here I stop, because there is room for, I think, more debate later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans-Werner. And I think, as you see, there are loads of problems facing subsea cables, but I wanted to follow up on what you said there at the end with getting away with it also, because as you've seen, as you have written about, Elisabeth, somebody just got away with it. The crew of the Eagle S, yes, a part of the sort of shadow fleet who was involved in an incident cutting cables in the Baltic Sea, just got away scot-free from a Finnish court case. So of course that case, it at least seems, looking at it from the outside, that even when the state here, Finland, goes to the step of actually arresting the people involved, or going out and dragging them to sea or to land, you just get dismissed at court, because you don't have any sort of you don't have any reach in the parts of the sea where this happened. So what type of signal does this send to actors who want to cut cables in general, Elisabeth?
It was a fascinating case. I just want to make sure that everybody remembers the Eagle S case from Christmas Day. Yeah? A few nodding heads. So on Christmas Day, the Eagle S cut 5 cables in the Gulf of Finland, and that is significant. I mean, you don't just cut 5 cables accidentally, most of us would say, but the crew said they had no idea they were dragging the anchor. So what happened is the Finnish border guard and police intervened after the 5th cable. That involved intervening in the economic zone, which was highly controversial, because you're not supposed to do that, as General Wiermann just said. But what can you do as the coastal state if a ship has already cut 5 of your cables and is approaching the 6th cable and then potentially the 7th, 8th, and so forth? So I think Finland earned the respect of a number of industry watchers, coastal states and so forth, in daring to take this step, and not just daring to take this step of boarding the vessel, but then also detaining it, detaining the crew, then putting the captain and the first and second mate on trial. And the trial was highly significant, because it was the first case, apart from a couple of cases in Taiwan, it was the first case where the coastal state really tried to convict somebody, crew members, seafarers who had been involved in an obvious cable cut. And what the prosecutors had to do was to prove that Finland had jurisdiction. So they said they tried to prove that, even though it was the damage was in the exclusive economic zone, because obviously vessels that may be interested in harming cables are not going to sail in territorial waters. They would be foolish to sail in territorial waters. They will sail in the exclusive zone because that's where you can get away with cutting cables. So the Finnish prosecutors were very... Is there anybody from Finland here? Okay, were very clever in the strategy they used to try to prove that despite it being an exclusive zone, Finland had jurisdiction. Then the other really clever thing they did, which I must say I was impressed. I wouldn't have thought of that solution, even though I've been pondering these cable cuts now since they started happening. The other clever thing they did was on the matter of intent. So every single time cables have been cut under mysterious circumstances, the seafarers, the crew on that vessel, if they have been contactable, have said, "Oh, we had no idea we were dragging our anchor." And I mean, how can you prove that they wanted to drag the anchor? You can just not prove what's going on in somebody's head. So that has always been the hurdle, right? I mean, how can we prove anything? How can I prove that you find this entertaining, even though you may say you find it entertaining, and so forth? So what the Finnish prosecutors did was really clever. They said, by getting onto a vessel that was in such poor shape that the anchor could conceivably fall out, which is what happened, crew members showed intent to damage undersea infrastructure. I thought that was a really innovative strategy, and the court agreed with the prosecutors on that point, but not on the jurisdiction point, which is how they got away with it. Although now the prosecutors have appealed. So let's see what happens in the next phase. But this is where we are, and it just proves or illustrates, I think, how important it is to understand what rules apply to the oceans, because most of us are sea blind. We are not used to thinking about the rules, the maritime rules, international conventions, UNCLOS, and so forth. I feel like I'm totally infused by UNCLOS these days, but it has been a steep learning curve over several years. But most of us just don't think about UNCLOS that much, and that's why when a cable cut happens or a suspicious cable incident happens, or by the way, when any shadow vessel sails through any country's exclusive economic zone, people say, well, yeah, we should detain the vessel, we should sink the vessel, and so forth. No, we should not, because that would be a violation of UNCLOS. Then it would be a race to the bottom, as it were. No pun intended. So this is the challenge. Well, the challenge is to educate everybody about UNCLOS. A very dry challenge, but it is. I think the public needs to understand why our governments have limited rights and abilities to intervene against these vessels. Then the other thing to understand, I think, is the economic cost that these cable cuts cause. It's not just a matter of, a cable was cut under suspicious circumstances. It can be fixed. Actually, if it's a data cable, it's not that expensive. If it's a power cable, it's massively expensive. But either way, it costs money, which the operators, the owners, then have to come up with, not the vessels cutting the cables, but the owners. That is another reason why it's in everybody's interest to try to understand this problem and hopefully address it. And then the last thing to say about cable cuts, at least in this round, is we need to fully appreciate the work or the skills that go into repairing these cables. So there have been conversations in lots of countries about maybe we should have a sovereign repair capability. Yes, that's fine, but who is going to be on that vessel? Being a cable surgeon, which is what I call them, is a highly skilled job. And I think all of us desk warriors here, we can't hold a candle to the people who repair cables. That is massively skilled work. And if you make a mistake, the cable is not going to work. So who are these people who we would recruit to work on these vessels? There is a massive shortage already in the cable surgeon business because we are all sea blind. We don't even, I think most people wouldn't even know that such a profession exists, and yet it's as indispensable as the cables themselves. And I remember I was talking a few weeks ago to somebody in the repair business, cable repair business, and I said, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to invite people for study visits on your vessel so they can see what goes on, and then they can go out and talk about it and hopefully inspire young people to go into this business. Well, turns out it wouldn't work because these repair vessels are so busy repairing cables they don't have time to entertain people on the study visit. So it illustrates how incredibly busy they are doing the indispensable work that they have to do. But we should also, I think the bottom line is we should appreciate that they exist and that there are not enough of them.
Thank you. So to summarize, the Finns were daring and they were bold, but it didn't work, as of yet at least. So playing the ball back to you a little bit, Hans-Werner. Okay, the Finns, they tried a new approach. It didn't work. Is there any way to deter and sort of a motivated actor from cutting cables or cutting gas lines or anything else in the high seas?
This particular case, I think, was also linked to a ship from the Shadow Fleet. And I think Russia found out one thing. It's nice to use a ship from the Shadow Fleet to destroy some cables, but what they achieved was a great focus on ships of the Shadow Fleet. So in the Baltic Sea, most Shadow Fleet tankers are nowadays accompanied by vessels from NATO. I think they have to rejudge and reassess what they are doing with the Shadow Fleet. And I think the outcome is pretty clear. The transportation of oil is strategically much more important, and to get away with the Shadow Fleet doing it much more important than destroy a few cables in the Baltic Sea. So I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen since then another Shadow Fleet ship doing the same stupid thing, I would say. I think that's the conclusion the Russians have drawn as well. When you look at the threat, we have heard about the growing infrastructure because data centers, artificial intelligence, more data are being processed, so we get more infrastructure. That adds resilience by definition. Resilience to the underwater infrastructure, to the cables. The question is that of autonomy, who owns the cable, who operates the cables, and some say some cables are more important than others because of latency issues. So if you are in the financial markets, but here are the specialists, there seem to be some cables which are more important because of lower latency than others. And you can pick out these cables and do more harm than just destroying a communication cable. From a military point of view, we are also seeing this mapping exercise where the Russians are using three types of vessels, either the classic Russian fleet vessels, which we control anyway every day. Then they have a second category of ships, which are usually starting their names with academic or professors. They are typical dual-use ships, so doing things that are perfectly legal, natural or science exploration tasks and missions, but the sensors are also good to identify the cables on the bottom of the seas. And the third fleet is, which makes us most of the difficulties, it's either the Shadow Fleet or civilian Russian ships, which can be easily equipped with sensors and do the mapping. Why do they do the mapping? You want to know, if you on short notice want to destroy not one cable, but more cables. You want to know where they are because you want to do it in a very short period of time. You don't plant the explosive today because the risk that the explosive will be detected today is very, very high nowadays, in particular with more and more autonomous undersea vehicles coming online, which can autonomously check a pipeline of 1,200 nautical miles, coming up, sending the data back, then just doing change detection. So technology is catching up. But In a run-up to the crisis, after the Ukraine-Russia war, which might unfold in the context of the Baltic countries, then Russia wants and needs a strategic opportunity to dare that adventure. And one of it would be to shut down communication between Europe and the United States in a very short period of time. And that would require the mapping, and that would then require to plant explosives in a very short period of time in a number of cables. And then it all adds up, the mapping, what we see, no explosives. That's then not hybrid warfare anymore. That's the preparation of the strategic high-intensity warfare campaign. I think that's where we, on the military side, NATO, have to look very carefully. The other is the hybrid attacks, which have been discussed at length. What can we do about it? That was your question. We have sent ships to the Eastern Baltic Sea. You could argue, since we sent the ships, nothing has happened. I gave you another argument why nothing has happened, because Russia had made a reassessment on the usefulness of using Shadow Fleet ships on destroying cables. Maybe it's a mix of both. What I found out is the presence of warships is extremely important in a much different context. I talked to people from the wind energy side, and they said, after the pipeline Nord Stream exploded, great you are here, because it gives us confidence that we can invest in our very expensive infrastructure. And if you look what is in the plan for the North Sea when it comes to green energy and wind energy, they need the trust of investors that the government takes care of their infrastructure. So it's more addressing our own audiences than necessarily addressing the Russian audience when we send the ships on the sea. So it's psychologically extremely important that we are present. I would like to stop.
Thank you very much. And over to you, Darren, because of course, as an operator of these cables, once they're cut, they have to be fixed. And as you hinted at, we may not have enough repair capacity in general, but under what sort of scenarios do we have enough, and under what scenarios do we not have enough repair capacity? And what do you, as an operator, think needs to be done in this field?
Yeah, there is a bottleneck, a shortage in terms of repair ships. First of all, so the majority of these repair ships are constantly, as Elisabeth said, they're literally 24/7 at work, and there aren't enough of them. Certainly not European. We're also seeing that. It is countries like China, for example, who are the ones that are actually investing in the repair ships and upgrading. Now, coming back to, we have a level of control, obviously, within our own European territorial waters, but those repair ships then are used in areas such as East and West Africa, where there are no other options. So there again, you're having that discussion around sovereignty. In terms of actual resilience and redundancy, according to NATO, 92% of submarine cable data now originates from hyperscalers, and most new and planned cables landing in Europe will be controlled by those companies. So again, we have a strategic autonomy issue when it comes to even, our existing capacity and cables. But again, and I know I'm going to, sound like a broken record, but it comes back to that economic security question, right? And scale, right? This is no longer just a communication issue or a cable issue. It's an economic security issue for which we require greater government and military intervention and cooperation with us as a private sector. I think that's where we've now seen the paradigm shift move, whereas traditionally that would have been the case. The last point I would also make is that everybody also talks about satellite. Again, we have the same, as you know, we have the same challenge when it comes to the US hyperscalers and with regards to satellite. Vodafone and our sector are trying to work on a European solution to this. But according to our experts, and I'd be keen to hear from the general on this, and according to NATO experts, for proper resilience, you have to join up your subsea cable strategy with your satellite strategy, because the future cables will be ultimately transmitting and working from satellites. So the idea is that if you can have this, so when we look to the Commission and the action plan, our view is you can't just have an action plan on subsea cable, an action plan on satellite, an action plan on terrestrial. We need a holistic approach to digital connectivity, secure and safe connectivity, full stop, across Europe, which encapsulates subsea and satellite capability, and that creates the level of redundancy and resilience, and ultimately a European version of that as well, which unfortunately, as I said, requires a level of investment. So you can have, we can have all of the ships and the cables or whatever that we want, but we also need investment. That's basically what we require.
Just add one thing to that, which is there are clearly risks and threats involving cables, but they are so inexpensive and so efficient compared to satellites, and obviously with much more capacity. So there's no way around transporting our data via cables, and the only answer is to try to make things to try to make them as to protect them as much as possible. And as you said, Darren, clearly, and the strategies need to go together, but I have sensed over the years, some people, over the months, I should say, because this has only come up more recently, some people fantasizing about us moving more data transmission to satellites. Well, that is going to be many times more expensive and complicated than it is to use cables. So the cables, it feels like, they are the potatoes of global connectivity, and then you can maybe have a little bit of satellites as a maybe I don't know. What is a more expensive kind of food? Maybe. Caviar. So satellites, you can have like as a little bit of a caviar dish, but the potatoes are the cables, and that's why it's in everybody's interest, everybody on the good side, that they be protected.
Maybe I could just respond. I won't disagree with Elisabeth in terms of, and absolutely, it's good that somebody independently is verifying that satellite will never replace the existing networks, because I think that's a misnomer which is being spun, that we're all going to wake up tomorrow morning and all of our phones are going to, we'll get 100% coverage thanks to satellite. Satellite, though, is really important from a resilience perspective, not necessarily on the sea, but certainly what I'm talking about is regards to the land. So the final mile, where there sadly isn't the economic case, for example, in rural areas or areas where the demographics don't allow us to do that. Also when it comes to military, right? So on-field battle, but also from a naval perspective as well, right? Satellites are there to complement and to sort of, I describe it sort of like the halo sort of layer that sits over those existing networks, both on the sea and on land. But what is super important is that, and I'm looking to the Commission, but I look to NATO, the External Action Service, is whatever that strategy is, like I said, we can't have this segmentation or silo-based approach to connectivity. We have to have this end-to-end approach when it comes to safety, security, and resilience. And unfortunately, there is a premium on that and somebody somewhere has to pay that premium. And what we're saying is we now need to share the burden of that premium. And my final point is, I think we also have there has to be a role here around, and I agree with Elisabeth's point around education, right? Educating citizens, both young and old, about how, the security of these cables are important and are not taken for granted. And I think that's really, really important now that we educate citizens, because we as an operator, I have this conversation, for example, with consumer organizations where, if we probably ask an average citizen and you had sort of a criteria of 5 things of price, coverage, quality of service, safety and security, I would suggest that that's probably when they fill out their tick box of what's important, their survey of what is important to them, it would probably be in that order. But when something happens in safety or security sphere, all of a sudden that's a big problem, right? That's a massive problem. So I think it's also about educating society that, unfortunately, in the current geopolitical environment, there is a premium now that has to be paid on security.
I'll just add one thing. I know it's not my turn, but I've thought many times that every time somebody watches Netflix, there should be a little announcement saying you are consuming so and so much data by watching this movie.
It's not a bad idea, and I must say, for someone who has just written a report specifically on cables and not cables and satellites, I'm continuing the tradition of thinking in silos. But when we go to you, Miguel, what do you agree with Darren? Are we thinking too much specifically about one thing and not seeing everything holistically, or what do you think?
I agree with many of the things. I agree with many of the things that have been said about the need for a holistic approach to connectivity. Actually, the Council of EU has done recently some conclusions on diversity and resilience of networks. I think something like that at the Polish presidency, but the point is precisely that one. So there's mention of cable, satellite, or all of those there. So there's this acknowledgement. Then to get that, there's the issue of silos between infrastructures that we mentioned, but there's different types of silos, and there's one obvious one that, let's call it a silo, which is differences, between member states. And then when it comes to, in particular, to spectrum, to that resource, if we want to go towards something more integrated, it will be necessary to tackle that fragmentation. So watch the spot. The DNA, Digital Networks Act, will propose something about it. Satellite, yeah, for sure. I mean, it doesn't replace submarine cables or terrestrial cables, for that matter. It's great to have satellite in, 2 cases. You mentioned the last mile, but also in case of disaster. The infrastructure is down, so it's great to have that SMS, that your relative is okay, and much more than that, actually, for the rescue teams. It's great, but, in terms of capacity, even though satellite is progressing very far, we hear at least a lot of the potential, but it can replace submarine cables. But I want to come back on something that Darren said about the security, national security aspect. I think you're right. Security might not be the first thing that comes to mind of consumers, but it's not the first thing that comes to mind of private sector, or also of industry, because it costs money and it doesn't get you a return immediately. And there's this issue of the commons, the externalities, right? When there's some problem, then very often from it's normal, it's only natural to say, I don't impose so many regulations, including on security, but when there's a real issue, turn to government. So on that, you open the issue. It's really interesting. It's not just about cables. It's about any networks. Any networks. I mean, traditionally, this has been private industry driven. These technology developments have gone very fast. Private sector was taking care, but now these communication networks, our lives depend on them, okay? So it cannot be just left to the private sector, so to speak, because it was said by you that actually how much investors are reassured by having NATO vessels. So that is how it happens. When there's a serious problem, people are gonna turn to governments for security issues. So there must be a way of finding some sort of cooperation. Because this is not anymore something that can be left to the private sector. It's just too big geopolitics. I just talk about defense, but then there's the other side of the coin, which is attack, which is some governments are weaponizing these things. So, as I said, it's not just about cables. It happens with all types of infrastructure, data centers, you name it. But at the end of the day, data infrastructures, connectivity, it's integral part of our society. So we are sitting on sometimes on very shaky foundations, I must say. Cables are perhaps at the end of the day not a bad thing, because when I see those many cuts, and despite of the limitations, they are repaired relatively quickly. But it's a general problem that we're seeing in cables that affects all the communication infrastructures. That's it.
Yes, I would like to add 2 points. One, to add to the complexity you have just mentioned, the connectivity between cables and satellites. I was just involved in a project very much in the infant stages, where the question is being raised how to protect our energy security. The networks are becoming more complex because of green energy. You have wind energy here, you have sun energy there, you have some more basic power plants there. So the networks become much more complex, and they require a much more tight control and management. So if that goes down, we have a problem. So if the energy goes down, in Spain, we had the issue, it was very difficult to restart the network. So you have to think about what to do if the energy goes down, if certain elements are taken out. And this project is about using satellites, coming back to the satellites, and a special frequency so that the satellites are linked to the control system of the energy networks so that it works even if the energy is down in some places in the country. So it's a very complex environment. And it's absolutely right, we can't afford to continue in stovepipes. So communication, data, energy is one thing. The second thing, how to tackle it. And I briefly touched on, I visited capitals in NATO, and they said, glad you come because here are so many stakeholders. We asked nations in NATO to provide us one strategic point of contact that comes to our meetings twice a year to NATO to talk about the security and the protection of critical undersea infrastructure. Some had a real hard time and struggled because most of our constitutions, and I'm a German, I know what I'm speaking about, are designed in stovepipes because we don't want to have this centralized power in our governments. So we have stovepipes in our constitution, and that applies for many other nations as well. But by asking the nations to provide us this strategic point of contact, at least we were cascading down the impact of, or the necessity to enhance the discussion and communication in this triangle, government, military, and private sector actor, down to the nations. That's the only way. They now meet twice in NATO, the strategic points of contact, plus representatives from private sector actors, security specialists, national security, intelligence services. So it's an open forum for exchange of views and best practices. We are not in a position like the European Union to actually transform that into legislation. That, on the other hand, makes it more attractive for some of the nations and players to come to us because they don't expect soon a law which will then regulate everything, but it's informal. So this is the pragmatic aspect, how we can actually enhance the cooperation, how we can start the discussion. And at the end of the day, it's the nation, it's the private sector actor that has to do the homework. We just can start the process, but it needs to be done in our capitals, in our nations, and in the companies based on a win-win model for all sides. Otherwise, it won't work.
Thank you. And moving on, of course, now we're moving forward and we need more ships to be able to repair capacity once it is broken, and we need new cables to be redundant and have redundancy in our networks. But of course, these are very expensive, and it's prohibitively expensive to buy ships and just keep them at shore. But to you, Miguel, what can the European Union do here? Is the solution for you guys to just pay for cables and ships, or is it more of a coordinating role, or how do we move forward?
Well, first of all, we need to have a discussion here. This is not a profitable business, I hear, repairing cables. And also parts of industry we talk to, they say the repair capacity that is there is enough. That's a message that we get. Perhaps behind that, there's a fact of not wanting the public sector, to mingle too much with this market, where the margins are low, as I said. But we also see there are two concerns. One was mentioned is the aging of the vessels. And the second is, what if scenario? Because the repair capacity is enough, at least for data cables. For power cables, as I said, is more difficult under the current circumstances. But if indeed we have a scenario where, as it was mentioned before, some people out there have been mapping cautiously and then decide to plant a few explosives, in strategic cables, is the repair capacity going to be enough? So we think not. So what we are thinking is, for sure, at least the issue of the repair capacity is one of the aspects that is being looked at, that is mentioned clearly in this action plan. Actually it's a communication, so a policy document, basically, which what it does is to point at some. For those of you who know a bit how the Commission works, it puts an issue on the map and kind of actually groups, put bundles together a series of activities that already exist and points at new actions in the future. So one of the things that already exist, it is the Connecting Europe Facility digital program, that has funded quite a few submarine cable projects, and it continues to do so. And very soon, next month, there will be the announcement of the results from the last call 4, which has been heavily oversubscribed. So we can see that there's demand for that. So one of the things that we are considering is, next to fund particular routes, is to potentially fund horizontal capacities, so including repair capacities. But this has to be carefully, discussed with industry in particular, because this is not something on which just go there and throw money. This type of programs is really for deployment, co-funding. So it's not 100% co-funding. So it really needs to make a difference. But so that, in reply to your question, what we're looking at is, discussing precisely what's the situation on the market. What would be, what would contribute, to have a bit of EU public funding push forward without, kind of distorting this market and crowding out private investment. So such an intervention, it needs to be carefully assessed, and that's what we are looking at now at the moment.
I think the way, just to pick up on the point around what you may have been told around capacity and availability, I think it's a bit like finding a builder or a plumber in Brussels. There's plenty of them around, but, are they of the level of quality? Can they deliver the level of service? Can you get them within the next day or two? Unlikely, right? So the lead times, for example, even booking a repair ship is months and months. And then, he comes along and he needs these permits to do it. So permits are also an issue. Very complicated, right? Particularly when you're also dealing in areas where there are sanctions regimes. An example of this is in the US. In the US, there is an immediate exemption for us as telecom operators, for example, to go in if we wanted to go and if we managed to get a repair ship or managed to get it repaired, we get an automatic derogation as a licensed operator who is regulated to go straight away. In the EU, that doesn't happen. I could give lots of examples where we have been held up due to the fact that the sanctions regime isn't agile and flexible enough, and we get caught up in that, and we have to, as a good operator, play by the rules, and that then provides ends up in a delay to what we want to do and how we can get repaired. So again, we need a more of a joined up approach of that. And then, like everything else, right? There's also a market concentration. It's a bit like, it's a limited, Elisabeth talked about the fact that, these cable surgeons are unique, but they're so unique that there's only so many of them, but there's also only so many of those companies, and they, they'll obviously pool together, they work together. So we need to, I would agree with Elisabeth's point, like we need to train up more of these companies. We need to grow European companies, because, there must be a reason why the Chinese are investing and other countries are investing. There is a, we're seeing the geopolitical trends. There is an opportunity here for civil and private sector companies in this space to grow with the right type of maybe funding, whether it is from the Commission or from the likes of the EIB, etc., to maybe grow our own fleet. But final point is, it's all about pooling and resourcing. And it's quite funny that I'm sat here, like after I joined the Ashton cabinet when she was the first High Rep in 2009. And it was all about pooling and resourcing with NATO, and we're still, sadly, over 10 years later, and we're still talking about pooling and resourcing. So we very much welcome the action plan for the Commission. The only thing I would say is, let's put the emphasis on the word action and less on the plan. So that's our sort of message, I think, as a sector.
Thank you. What do you think, Elisabeth? Is there a movement here moving forward? Or as Darren just said, we've been talking about specific topics here for 10 years, but you have a broad view. Is things moving forward or not?
You have?
No, yeah, regularly, yeah.
Okay.
Ferry to the UK very regularly, yeah.
Well, so you stand out. You are the only person here who has been on a ship.
Yeah, and the sort of concentration of ownership and use of capacity among just a handful of American tech companies is very stark when you look at it from the outside. Of course, Europe famously has had some issues with the US over the last year. In your work, Miguel, of course, there's a huge debate about technological sovereignty in Europe, economic security. Is this something you think about in your work on cables? Are there any issues or risks you see with ownership of a lot of the most strategic cables, cross-continental cables, being in foreign hands?
Well, I would say this is something we think of not just regarding submarine cables, but in all of the work about technology. Cloud, artificial intelligence, everything is, this is a very important consideration, especially, with this, since the new administration is in place, United States, which exposed much more the, let's say, the gap. Well, I don't need to recall Draghi and all the reports, but this is discussed about for submarine cables, but also for all of the other technologies, and on many levels. Also, the fact that over these 10 years, the situation has dramatically changed. Also, in terms of who's investing, as it's reflected in the report. It's not just the fact that they are from the US or wherever. It's private cables. Those that invested traditionally, more telecom operators, they are not doing anymore. Of course, these big companies, content providers, hyperscalers, they have their goals, which are they're heavily investing in the intercontinental route between the United States and Europe. Other more regional, less profitable, cables. They are less interesting from that point of view. It was mentioned before in the beginning. There's this issue of the lack of investment capacity of telecom operators, which is a real concern. So of course, this is very much what might have changed perhaps in the last months is the realization that these submarine cables. This aspect of electronic communications has to be added to the reflection. We were focusing on other things, still do, like, as I said, cloud, artificial intelligence, many other things. But now we need to think about submarine cables. And as it was very well put before, it's not just all abstract and software and, virtualization. And, it's very physical infrastructure that we need to take care of as well. That will play, I think, in the discussion for that matter on the next multi-annual financial framework, where the place of technology, well, at least the proposal from the Commission, the place of digital has been substantially expanded, and rightly so. But it will be just this physical part of things which had been a bit forgotten. It will very much come to the fore. I think the issue of electricity has helped there. To realize it's all very good to have the best software, but if you no longer have electricity, it stops there. So in this geopolitical world, we've also discovered, I think recently, by the way, that there's the bottom layers like electricity, water, all of these things.
Netflix.
That has become, an issue as well. We need energy consumption So that's part of the holistic approach to the problem that we have to have.
I just have to tell you a story about my most recent time on the ship, which was a few months ago when I moved back from the United States to the UK, and on our way back from the US, well, we had a cat, and my daughter insisted the cat had to come with us, which was a good thing. You shouldn't just discard or give away your pet. So the cat had to come with us, and I discovered that. Well, first of all, I asked around, asked people, who had moved back to Europe, and they said, yeah, you just buy a ticket or sort of a permit for the dog or cat, and they come with you. Well, it turns out the UK is different, so you can only fly into the EU with your pet, and I had to figure out, what do I do after I've arrived in the EU? How do I get the cat to the UK? And it took us days to figure out how to, days of Googling, using internet bandwidth and undersea cables and so forth, couldn't figure out how to get the cat from the UK, from the EU to the UK. You can't bring a cat on or a pet on the Eurostar. So how do you get the pet from the UK, from the EU to the UK? It turns out there is a guy called Charles who waits for you at Charles de Gaulle Airport and transports your pet for £2,000. But I thought, it's got to be a different way. So I discovered a way that apparently everybody traveling to the UK with a dog or cat does it. They fly to Amsterdam, then they take local trains to Hook of Holland, then they take a ferry from Hook of Holland, to the UK. And so we took this ferry, which is why I've been on a ferry recently, and it was a massively enjoyable experience. Lots of pet owners, and regular passengers with their pets. So should you ever need to bring a pet to the UK, this is how to do it.
On that tip, I think we'll open the floor up for questions if there are any, or pets or anything else. So one question there, and please give your name and affiliation. I think you can just say it out.
To make an European one, if it makes sense to make an EU ones, because in that case maybe the private market is a little bit less affected by money put by the public, let's say. So those three questions. Thank you.
We'll start the question DNA. The DNA is being prepared now, so I shouldn't say much on that, but I wouldn't bet lots of money on having something compulsory on submarine cables in the DNA. That's personal view. On repair, well, the last thing, European, this is a business, the repair, so having a European, so these are all private companies. It is true they might be more or less influenced by closer to governments, but it's a business. So as I said before, We're looking into it, but it really needs to fit with what exists rather than distort it. And there's several levels of intervention that one could think of. So one would be probably supplement some of the models that this some aspect. But building new ships, it takes time. So one could think of a strategy, of a repair strategy over a certain period of time. So, supplementing some of the, certainly the issue of skills, very relevant there as well. But one has to have perhaps a shorter term kind of idea, but also in the longer term. But it really takes a careful market assessment, as I said before. So I wouldn't see as such a European kind of fleet, but rather try and support part of the capacity that exists on the market. And that's it from my answers.
Well, when it comes to the interpretation of law, I mean, there are no limits to creativity. There is a limit what the judge will accept when you are the prosecutor and try to make a case. But there's also another aspect, and that's what we want to do to some Russian ships in the Baltic Sea is not necessarily what we want to see being done to our ships in the Red Sea. And these things are collected globally. So it's also a geopolitical question. How far do you want to go with the interpretation of some laws? Because it might fly in your face in another situation where you don't want to have this interpretation. So there are geopolitical factors which are beyond the pure law science, I would say, which need to be considered in these discussions as well. Therefore, they are so complicated. I briefly made a remark on the flag state. It's not that the high seas are lawless. That's not the point. If you commit a crime, whatever it is, on the high seas, it's the responsibility of the flag state to actually prosecute the crime. That's all fine. But if the state is the perpetrator and the prosecutor, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's also the weakness. I'm not sure Elisabeth will agree, but when you look at the shadow fleet, that's also a weakness of the shadow fleet because these flag states are pretty murky. And that's why I think the High Representative now started an initiative, I read about it today, to approach these flag states to get an agreement with them, because you can board every ship as long as the flag states voluntarily agrees to the boarding of the ship. So if the European Union would get an agreement with some of Cayman Islands and other nations which are well known for providing these flags, then boarding can take place because it's voluntary. The next question, which needs then to be settled, who is in charge of prosecuting the perpetrators which might be on board of the ship. So it's one thing to get on board of the ship, which is also psychologically very important to achieve that. But the next step, if you then find something, it's probably, again, depending on where you are, on the high seas or in the exclusive economic zone, against the flag state. So then you have to make sure that the flag state also has a criminal justice system in place which would deliver the outcome you expect it to deliver. So it's a complicated issue. That's why it's hard to find a common interpretation of the law. You can use environmental law, because if you drag an anchor across something valuable in the exclusive economic zone, it might amount to environmental damage, which could be prosecuted, no question. So there are no limitations, but you may have to make your point in front of the court, and you have to convince the judge that you are on the right side of the law.
Can I add regarding flag states, adding to what you said? This is precisely the reason. Well, first of all, the flag states that the Shadow Fleet uses are obviously the lowest of the low, and I call them flags of extreme convenience. That's not an official term, but it is countries that have no maritime expertise and have no legal system to speak of, certainly not one that would be able to prosecute such a case. And we have seen some of them wake up to the reputational damage that being involved with the Shadow Fleet does. So Eswatini was an early popular country, right? Then I think the king discovered that his focus on international tourism was being undermined reputationally by the ship registering shadow vessels. So Eswatini decided to get out of, or he told the registry to stop registering shadow vessels. But then Russia has moved on to other countries, right? And that's what will continue to happen as soon as they wake up to the fact that, oh, maybe it's not such a good thing for our open registry to flag shadow vessels. Russia will then go with, or Russian oil exporters will go with other countries with open registries, minimal maritime expertise, and so forth. And that's why the Eagle S, for example, was flagged or is flagged in the Cook Islands. I mean, a population of 17,000. It is just not a country that is going to prosecute any sort of cable cuts, or even if they wanted to. And so I think there are enough shady, or I shouldn't say shady, enough countries in the world with open registries run by shady characters who will continue to flag shadow vessels when the previous round of flag states realized that maybe it's not such a good idea. And eventually Russia will run out of countries that are willing to flag, but it's going to take a few more years. And I was going to say something about your third question, but I don't remember what it was.
It was the U.S. Cable repair vessel. So actually, the U.S. state puts some money on a private vessel, and when there is something in war zone, there is an insurance and so on.
Yes.
They can go and just
subcom.
operate.
Yes. So it was 2 vessels that they rent for a year each. So it's not a lot, but they decided to do it. What I always wonder when it comes to state-owned or state-operated repair vessels is, in addition to who is going to crew them, because if you want the repairs done, it's useless if you don't have those cable surgeons, right? So who are the cable surgeons going to be? Then what priorities, which cables will you give priority, right? So the private companies have their own ranking order under which they repair cables, right? So where is the state going to fit into this scheme? Will it only repair certain cables, and if so, which ones? So obviously, as a cable operator, I would want to be the cable owner whose cable gets priority when the state repairs, but who sets that priority list? So if 5 cables are damaged by somebody, how does my cable get to the top of the list where the government says we are going to use our repair vessel for that? And I don't know of any country that has set such a priority list yet. It sounds good to have a state repair capability, but that includes somebody deciding who gets access to those vessels.
Thank you. There's one more last question back here, and then I think we're gonna go in for the landing.
Well, the name is Mark, currently a European Commission trainee working on connectivity, but I also have skin in the game because I'm Estonian. And I wanted to ask, following these conversations a lot, why is it that we hear so little reference to actual measures of physical protection, as in metallic blankets or, laying the pipelines and cables under the seabed, so digging a trench with a robot and digging them, burying them underground, essentially. If you could share your opinions, why is it that this aspect of protection is so little discussed in these panels?
Well, I think the key question is money, because it becomes extremely expensive to protect and to put cables, for example, into the bottom of the seas. You can do it, and some of the cables are actually protected that way, but only when they come closer to the landing zone, where more traffic is to be expected, where the waters are more shallow. On the high seas, you could imagine that a cable is just floating on the high seas. I have difficulties myself to imagine that. There is just a cable swimming on the high seas. That's it. If you want to dig that in, it would cost you a fortune. Probably it's cheaper to deploy a second cable after the damage than to dig it into the bottom of the seas. It's being looked at, but only when it comes to the landing zones, inside shallow waters, territorial waters, for example, closer to the beach. So there it happens. On the other hand, the anchor is in a position to actually plow through the bottom of the sea as well. So it's not done by 30 centimeters of sand or 40 centimeters of sand. It needs to be really deep to protect them against this kind of anchor drag. So it's really, I think, a cost factor why it's not so much considered.
Maybe, sorry if you don't mind, maybe we should just say that we are looking at, like as an industry, we're constantly looking at new innovations, new technology, but unfortunately it does come back to funding. So, you know, that's why we've been talking to the Commission and to the EU member states around, you know, how can we, through either the European Defence Fund, CEF, you know, there's a lot of new funding when it comes at the moment, like defence is a very sexy subject in Brussels. What we're saying is we want to see subsea cables as a silver thread through, and indeed digital connectivity needs to be a silver thread and at the heart of all of these funding plans and funding mechanisms, whether it's for the cables themselves, landing stations, but also for funding the redundancy, for incentivizing and creating the business case to be able to grow a fleet, not necessarily that it has an EU flag or a Estonian flag or whatever, but as a European, that there are companies that can grow and can enter into this space, because we need also a level of diversification. So unfortunately, the General is right. It does come back to funding, but we are constantly looking at new and different innovations, like I said, for example, linking how you link the cable infrastructure to the satellites. We've also looked at advanced technologies in terms of threat detection, mitigation. So also how can we, you know, pivot and move traffic across various cables so you don't have a single cable dependency, for example. So we're constantly trying to come up with new innovation, and that's where but it comes back to funding mechanism, and it's also from an EU NATO perspective. And then just my very final point, because I'm sure we all it's kind of hitting the time, and I know others may have wanted to ask a question. Just to answer the point, there is also a mechanism for prioritization of where ships, etc., are deployed, and that is NATO has a critical undersea infrastructure coordination cell, and we would like to see the European Commission maybe look at that. Maybe it could be an EU-NATO version of that cell that could, you know, literally monitor. You know, we would, as an industry, we would sign up to a set of criteria where we would report into a centre, and that centre, with the help of military and civil expertise, can then help support us to deploy, should we have enough ships and should we have enough cable surgeons to be able to go there as quick as possible. And also, you know, like I said, but it needs to be backed up with a simplified and harmonised regulatory environment, including the issue of, you know, really on the permitting side as well, that is modernisation of the permitting system. So we need that whole package of funding, expertise, and a regulatory rule book.
No.
Some very quick final words.
Yes. I guess it's appropriate to talk about burials since it's a final word. But so cables are buried, and as the General said, that happens closer to shore where there is the risk of them being hit by anchors, or anchors really. And then when it comes to steel, that is expensive, and it raises a question of how do you repair cables that are covered by steel. It's just massively complicated, and so that's why that hasn't taken off. But they are buried, but really no burial is as deep as an anchor can go, it is a question of cost, and this is why I think we are ending now where we started, which is this was all set up for more harmonious times, where the only harm that could befall a cable was that somebody accidentally caused harm to it by dragging their fishing net or their anchor.
Thank you very much. So I ask you all to join me in a round of applause for our speakers as we end now. thank you all for coming to this event, and there are some copies of the report at the back if you want to read it physically, or else it is online. So thank you very much and have a nice afternoon.